Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Fantastic, as always. This week we are tackling a topic amongst a couple certificates, a rating, and this is all about lost. We're going to talk about lost procedures for VFR pilots. We're going to talk about lost comms for both VFR pilots and IFR pilots under those certain circumstances, and hopefully we educate you some. And I learned a little bit while preparing for this show, and always good to know what to do when you're lost or when you've lost those radios. Wally, I don't remember a time that I ever really was lost. I'm not even sure, back in the early days, I'm not even sure if I knew where I ever was, so maybe I was just always lost, but I don't think I've ever really been lost when in VFR conditions.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think I have either. And you know, they're just different versions of lost. I think we've all been in a car driving somewhere, and we're kind of not where we think we ought to be, especially back before the days of GPS on our phone. And I think we've all probably said, "Oh no, we're lost." I can remember my kids hearing me say that and them freaking out in the back of the car. And me having to say, no, we're not really lost. We're just going to get there 5 or 10 minutes later. So yeah, it's the same way in the airplane. I mean, I can remember doing my first solo cross country and going from Monroe, Louisiana to Natchez, Mississippi, and it was 66 miles southeast. And I just remember thinking, okay, worst case, I turn left and go due east, and I'm going to hit the Mississippi River, and then I can follow the Mississippi River down and find a big bridge, and that's going to be Natchez. And, I didn't have to do that, but I can remember fretting over it and being a little bit nervous about it because, wow, 66 miles.
Yeah, now you fly 6,000 miles, but I can remember something similar. I think my long cross country was Hooks to Huntsville to Brenham back to Hooks or something close to that. And I can remember, not flying that leg from Huntsville to Brenham very often and it being pretty flat and pretty plain, looking for some power lines and watching my time and it's like you're watching the clock when you're on duty or working and you're like, oh my God, this thing's moving so slow. I never seemed to get to that waypoint. Although the times worked, my mental game was playing with me and I kept thinking, am I on the right track? Am I even going in the right direction anymore? And it's an uneasy feeling even when you're not sure. I can't imagine what it would feel like to really look all around me, look at my instruments, look at my map, and just I don't know where I'm at. That would be a pretty scary situation for sure.
Yeah, it would. And that's why, especially for VFR checkpoints, a lot of times the applicant will come in for me, and this goes for a commercial check ride or a private check ride. I'll ask them where their first checkpoint is, and it might be 30 miles down the road. And where's your second checkpoint? Another 30 miles. So we've got to go 60 miles to hit 2 checkpoints. The time to your first checkpoint is a lot of times worthless because if you're taking off from a controlled airport, let's say you're taking off at an airport that has a north-south runway, you're taking off south, and your direction of flight is northwest. Well, suppose the tower makes you fly a left downwind departure, or they tell you to extend upwind before you can turn on course. Well, now your times are all messed up. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have the first checkpoint very close in, maybe 5 miles away, someplace that there is no way that you can miss that. The local high school football stadium or the intersection, a major intersection. Okay, so now we have started at that first checkpoint, and the time from checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 2 should be rather reasonable, and then time from checkpoint 2 to 3. But I would say to not space these checkpoints out 60 miles or 30 miles. I mean, the first few checkpoints, they ought to be 5, 6, 7 miles apart. You don't want them more than 2 or 3 minutes away, because if you're off course, the farther you are, you can do geometry, and if you're 3 degrees off, at 30 miles, it's much farther away than it is at, say, 8 miles.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just recently was in the sim with a student, not teaching, more observing and just talking, because there was a little glitch and we fixed it. And everything he was doing was way too far apart, right? And I kept trying to explain to him that the tighter we could make these things come together, the easier you're going to have solving the problem that you have, which is staying on course, right? It wasn't these massive swings. And same thing, I remember my check rides, and ever since, there's a few big points here around this airport that we both fly at a lot. There's some railroad tracks, which just so happen to be right next to where I grew up. If I'm heading south, you should see those railroad tracks within a couple minutes. And if you're going north, there's a little town called Tomball. And if you're going northwest for any reason, you should see their water tower, their intersection of their kind of four corners, and one of the 2 football stadiums. Now they've built this massive white cross out there that if you don't see that white cross in 2 minutes, you're not going west. I mean, you have to see the cross if you're going west, right? So something like that, and I tell people when they ask me how to be better pilots, like, that's just a no-brainer. At least you're going in the right direction. Like, you don't have to be on the 270 heading to see the white cross. You can be pretty much anywhere from 330 to like 195 or 200, and you're going to see the white cross. At least you're going that direction, right? And the closer those next few points are, no question, you're going to find them. You're going to find them quicker. One of the reasons I don't think I ever got lost, much like you use the Mississippi River, I kind of stayed in the same triangle my entire learning phase. And I always kind of knew where 45 was, big interstate here in Houston. Kind of always knew where 290 was, and kind of the bend in 99. And if you live around here, kind of those both kind of feed you back into the airport. And if you don't fly more than 30 miles away, as long as you're stuck in between that, you're going to kind of always be almost funneled right back into Hooks Airport. So that's the reason I never got lost. I never got out of those little areas until I became an instrument/commercial pilot. But then I kind of knew what I was doing. So I remember meeting my DP, and if they asked me lost procedures, I had the 5 C's memorized. And it almost pains me that we talked a couple weeks ago about not using cheat sheet stuff, and we're going to teach a bunch of cheat sheet stuff tonight, Wally. But the 5 C's really are the things you want to learn, right? I want to confess. And the confession's probably, for most of us men, the confession's probably first to ourselves, right? Like, the fact that your kids heard you say you were lost kind of shocks me a little bit, because I would never say that in front of my kids. I would never confess that. I would say, no, I know exactly where we're going, all the while maybe not knowing. But, you gotta be telling yourself the truth. And when you don't know what you're looking at or what you're looking for, and you kind of get in that situation, the first thing you got to do is confess. And then it didn't early on make sense, but climbing really is the second best thing. If you climb, let's say 500 feet around here, you're probably going to see downtown Houston.
Yeah.
You're probably going to see the Woodlands. I'm sure every other city's got either a lake, a Great Lake, a mountain peak, something that a few hundred feet might point you towards something you're used to seeing and relieve all that stress. I mean, if you confess to yourself you're lost and you climb, that alone in VFR conditions might make it a non-event at that point, right?
Right. And also climbing is going to help you with radio reception, whether it be talking or whether it be navigation. So
no question. Yeah, good point. Well, and like you said, if you were looking for the Mississippi River, somewhere between Louisiana and the eastern side of the Mississippi River, you climb up a few hundred feet, you're probably going to see the river. If not, some bridges going over that river. And that's going to put you right back kind of where you need to be. The third one is something that may or may not be in all the, some people say 4Cs, some people say 5Cs, but the conserve is a big deal. And if anybody's been listening to the show for a while, has heard me ask this question and heard the answer. But Wally, what are the top 5 things you need to be a safe pilot?
Fuel, and fuel.
Without that, you're not going to fly for very long, right? Lots of other things can go wrong, but that's the one that if it's exhausted, you're gonna be forced to land somewhere. So conserving is really all about, and it might be conserve for 5 minutes. It might not be a long conservation act, but conserve, pull power, climb up, pull power a little bit, give yourself a little bit more time. If you're above 3,000 MSL, depending on what your POH says, it's probably time to lean and save a little bit of fuel. But by reducing power, you're going to save some time in your future. Not right now, but you're going to save it in the future. So conserve a little bit of fuel and then start to talk and comply with ATC. So we want to comply with the instructions that anybody from ATC is giving us, all the while communicating. And I thought those were kind of odd 2Cs at the end, but I think the communicating part is telling the rookie pilot or someone who doesn't want to confess that if you're running low on fuel, you need to explain that to someone. You don't need to be shy. You don't have to be a professional. Say, look, I got a quarter tank. Help me. I'm really worried that I only have a quarter tank. If they turn you away from maybe something that you're aware of, or turn you into a mountain, or whatever, turn you over the ocean, make sure they understand that you don't like what they're telling you. Just talk to them like another human being.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other tips? I mean, that while those are pretty basic, and that's in the AIM and that's in the flying handbook, this one's hopefully one that no one has to deal with. But if you do have to deal with it, the 5C should get you out of trouble really, really quick.
No, the other thing is, I would say is, this maybe doesn't really talk about being lost so much, but when you're picking your checkpoints for your cross country, make sure you're picking good checkpoints. And when I say that, for instance, let's say you're going east or west and there's a major north-south highway. That highway in and of itself is not a very good checkpoint, because you can be heading, 200 degrees all the way up to 340 degrees, and you're probably eventually going to hit that highway. Okay, so it may give you a good time hack, but it doesn't really tell you if you're on course. Now, the intersection of this major highway and this other highway, that might be a good, or that's a very good, you want specific points for your intersections. Be careful about bodies of water, because we're almost in a drought here in southeast Texas, so bodies of water don't look like what they look like on the sectional. They're dried up a little bit. If we're in a flooded situation, they look different. So take that with a little grain of salt. One thing that I think most people think would make great VFR checkpoints, that I think makes horrible checkpoints, is private airports. Private airports are hard as all get out to find, because it's usually a grass strip somewhere, and it may be overgrown, and maybe an airplane hasn't landed there in 5 years, and there's no discernible airstrip right there. Now, if you're very familiar with it and you know XYZ's airport, you know exactly what it looks like. That would be maybe a good point, but be careful of that.
Yeah, and I'll give one last example for me. I honestly, when I was a young pilot, meaning young in my hours, you fly out to the practice area here. There's really 3 cities that we probably talk about a lot, and that's Hempstead, Waller, Prairie View. Maybe you get to Brenham, but those 4 are all on the same major road with no major intersection. Maybe one intersection with Highway 6, but that's not at one of those cities. Those 4 small cities look very similar. Like there's no discerning. The only thing discerning between those 4 big cities are their football stadiums. And the fact that their football stadiums are all kind of on the northeast side of the city makes it more difficult unless you're able to read their name in the touchdown zone. I always struggled to understand, is that Waller or Hempstead?
Yeah.
And if that's your waypoint, those are like 7 or 8 miles apart. That's 4 minutes of flight time. That could start adding up if you're really lost. So
right.
As Wally said, the little yellow square on the sectional might be a city, but you might not know which city that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the grand scheme of things from the air.
Yeah.
All right, so that's lost procedures, VFR. Let's still stay with lost, but talk lost comms VFR. Much different than being lost. You might know exactly where you're going, but you can't talk to anybody. In the grand scheme of things, we've probably talked about this one more than we've talked about other things on the show, but it's been a preemptive strike to the electrical failure. Let's assume all things electrical are working. We'll go against that a little bit in a minute, but let's assume all things electrical are working. I've lost my audio panel. I've lost my push to talk. I've lost something that really is just inhibiting the radio communication. Oh no, what do I do now? And I think cell phone is the most obvious answer in today's times, but you'd have to have a Bluetooth headset or a way to communicate. I have yelled into the phone before, but I've not been able to hear what they've said, and that was honestly me trying to get my dad's attention as I was doing probably steep turns at about 1,500 feet over his house. But cell phone is the most obvious choice. Even if I had to text Wally and say, Wally, I'm somewhere between Waller and Hempstead. Please call somebody and tell them I'm coming home. That might be the next best option for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The chances of lost communication as not associated with a total electrical failure are pretty slim. Most people, most of the airplanes that people are flying have 2 independent communication radios. But we do have one common link, and there's an audio panel. So, you could have that audio panel go out. You could have your headset go out. And one thing I encourage CFIs to do with their students is to have them fly a flight without the headset. And then you're going to have a hand mic. So, most airplanes, probably somewhere in the seat back pocket or something, have a hand mic, or some do, some don't. But, that's a good thing to have in there in case you're in a situation where your headset just goes out, quits working. Most of the noise canceling headsets, if you lose battery power, you just lose the noise canceling feature, and the headset still works just fine. Most of us have probably dealt with that. But I think, I know I've talked about the time that I had the electrical failure in our Saratoga and we lost communication. Probably the biggest shock to all of us was the fact that the headsets came off and we were just talking. We weren't talking, we were yelling at each other in the airplane because it's so dang noisy. And that's a bit of a shock for most people. And I ask a lot of the applicants, I'll say, have you ever flown this airplane without the headset and just talked to your instructor? And I've never had anybody say yes. Everybody says, no, I've never done that.
I think mine turned the master off once so that I could see what that was like, but I don't think we took our headsets off. And something I've learned recently as a flight school owner that has changed lots of radios and audio panels is that all audio panels have a feature that if truly it is the audio panel that has failed, meaning electrically or switches are off or something, the pilot's seat should pass through the audio panel through to COM 1 without any interruption. Like, it should just work. So we've had an isolated audio panel that was really causing us all kinds of grief. We thought it was the audio panel. Long story short, it ended up being a loose wire somewhere else. But the avionics shop told me, just turn the audio panel off, sit in COM 1 and talk through COM 1. And if that is 5x5, it's probably not the audio panel, because we've isolated that that's not where, or if that wasn't 5x5, maybe it is the audio panel. So you have that option as a fail-safe in flight as well. Again, assuming all electrical stuff is working. But let's assume the cell phone option's out and we know we have electrical. We need a Squawk 7600. And I've said it on the show. Some people have commented about it. I definitely borrowed it, but I struggled remembering 7500, 7600, 7700. I read it somewhere, and the mnemonic for me is in order by which they come: 7500, 7600, 7700. If you can remember hijack, I can't talk right now, I have an emergency, then you will remember what those numbers are. 7500 is hijack, 7600 is lost comms, and 7700 is an emergency. Then Squawk 7600, and again, assuming you have electrical, a lot of people are going to know you've got major issues. And we've had ATC on, they've described it like you start flashing on the screen, like you become very apparent to them that you've lost comms.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next, it's try to be seen. And for me, be seen, if I'm doing practice maneuvers in a practice area, I have all my lights on anyway. But assuming you're going cross country and you've not had your nav lights on in the daytime, you haven't had your landing light on, your taxi light on, light all that stuff up. You want everybody to see as much as they can possibly see and be aware that you're out there, because you're not able to warn people or talk them off. And then I would suggest doubling the cloud distances. So if it's a day where it's a few puffs here and there, I would definitely stay more than 2,000 feet from the side of a cloud. I'd give myself a mile, 4,000, 5,000 feet from the cloud, just because I want a jet to see me long with enough time to move around me for sure. Anything to be seen is probably in your best interest at this point as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, most of us probably don't have every light gun signal memorized if we're not currently working on our private pilot certificate. So have those in your electronic flight bag, carry a cheat sheet, know what those light gun signals are if you're going to a towered airport. Circle outside of that towered airport until you can really understand the pattern of what's flowing through. Hopefully you get light gun signals. At Delta, you're supposed to try and establish communications. If you can't, there is the ability for you to establish that kind of flight flow and enter. Charlie, I think you'd be wiser to think that you have an emergency if you really need to land at Charlie or above. Make sure you do what's best for your situation, and don't let your ego cause a simple radio problem to become a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
I've heard too many sad stories, too many bent planes. If you need to land, do what you need to do to land safely, and then fill out the paperwork or have the phone call. Don't let someone else fill out the paperwork for you, for sure. What else to add there, Wally? You do a lot of private check rides. This has to come up in the orals. What have you seen from a common mistake, if anything, perspective?
No, most people are pretty good with this for the most part. I would just say to try to think creatively. If you're going into let's say you're going into a Class D airport, and this happens to you, and I will say, well, you could maybe call the tower on your phone, and they'll say, well, I don't have the phone number for the tower. Well, you probably have an EFB. You've got probably the phone number of the FBO that you're flying into. Call the FBO. Tell them. Or ask them for the tower phone number. They'll give it to you. Or have them call the tower. Just use whatever you can out there, whatever resources you can. Use it.
Yeah, like I might text you. I said that. I definitely think that's a great tip. Put all the towers in your local area in your phone, in your EFB. Why not? You never know. You might just create a cheat sheet of light gun signals and tower phone numbers because you might need them. The other day I challenged somebody and I said, why don't you have the big airport, Intercontinental here in Houston? Why not put that on your phone? Well, they don't expect small planes to come in there, and they're not going to clear me in. Well, what if it's the closest thing when you have an emergency? I dang sure want to call them on the phone before I just cross paths with a 777 on final, and the Behind the Prop podcast gets real close on the runway there. No hurt to have some extra tower phone numbers in your phone or EFB. You never know when you need them, and hopefully you never do, but you'd rather have them than not have them.
I have taxied out of our airport and gone to the run-up area, and after the radios start getting scratchy, and then we realize that we've had an alternator failure on the ground, and at this point our battery is drained quite a bit. We really can't even understand the ATC instructions over the radio. It wouldn't have been an emergency, but here we are on an active taxiway. We would have just taxied back to where we came from, but it would have been without a clearance. It just made it real easy. I've got the phone number in my phone. I just call them up and I say, hey, this is 123 Charlie Delta. We're over here in the run-up area. We've got an electrical problem. We need to taxi back. Yeah, go ahead. You're clear.
And that's a non-event at that point for sure every time.
Right.
Okay, the one where I might have a panic attack, and I'm sure we all would have a panic attack, is lost communications in IFR. You can't see anything. You're in IMC. If you're not in IMC, what's the rules? The rules are find VFR conditions, or if you're in VFR conditions, just continue and land as quick as possible, of course. But this assumption is we're in IMC, we're on this flight path, something's changed, we've lost radios. A phone might be helpful, but man, I can imagine not really knowing who to call if I was trying to fly from here to Florida, right? Hopefully I've got an EFB and I know who to call, but this is FAR 91-185. C to be exact, and it's pretty crystal clear. It's pretty short on what you're supposed to do. I think we talked briefly about some of this when we were talking about the cheat sheets the other day, and again, as much as it pains me, we're going to teach some of this, but this is in exact order. So this, I'll say it's kind of cheat sheet, not really. It's a memory aid more than it's a cheat sheet. This is exactly how the FAR reads, that you should think about your altitude and your route and some times in exactly this order. So the book says the altitude that I should fly if I've lost my comms is the one that I've been assigned. If I haven't been assigned one, it should be the one that I was vectored to. If I wasn't vectored to it, it should be what I was expecting. If I wasn't given something to expect, it should be what I filed. And I was taught that memory aid for me was I should think about driving to Avenue F. Avenue F is an acronym for those four letters, AVEF. So again, if I was assigned an altitude, I should fly that altitude. If I was vectored, I should fly that altitude. If I didn't have either one of those, but I had something that I was expecting, I should fly that altitude. And if I wasn't given any of those three, I should fly what I had filed. I think you said you never heard that acronym. Was that the one you hadn't heard, Wally?
Yeah, I had never heard that.
So that's exactly the 4 bullets right out of the FAR. And then the route that you should fly is not in this exact order, but it is such a good acronym to remember because it's something we all learn as instrument pilots, and that's MEA. So minimum en route altitude is something we always think about. We're just going to steal and borrow those 3 letters, and we want to fly the minimum altitude that we're allowed to fly. We want to fly the highest of these 3, by the way, the highest of these 3. And so if there's a minimum, whether it's a minimum en route altitude, it's an Oroka, it's something that we can't get lower than, we need to stay above that, and we need to fly the highest of these 3 again. If we were assigned something that's the highest number, we should fly that one. Or if it's an expected number, we should fly that one. So whichever of those 3 is the highest that we've been given, heard, expected, assigned, or is a minimum, we should fly that altitude if we do not have communications. So really Avenue F and MEA will do a lot of good for you to memorize what is in FAR 91-185C. And then the last little trick there is really the leave a clearance limit. So if we were at a fix, we should leave as close as we could to the time that they gave us to expect a clearance or further clearance time. And if we're not at a fix, we should leave if they gave us an expected time or a time that we had filed previously or been maybe given by ATC. That's probably going to be fairly rare that you're in a hold and something happens. But that's your altitude, that's your route, and then that's your time to leave clearance. All of those should be pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty logical, and if you can remember Avenue F and MEA, you're going to be in pretty good spirits when you decide to make a decision on what to do.
Yeah, you know, one thing I ask, and I'm going to give away an answer here. So if anybody's going to do an instrument check ride with me, you'll get this. But if people understand this, I think we're better pilots. I ask a lot. Well, I'll ask why we are required to file an alternate, and people will say, well, because you gotta show that you've done your due diligence and that you can get from point A to point B and then get to the alternate and have enough fuel and all this stuff. And yeah, that's fine. I mean, the FAA can say, okay, you have to do this, but why does the FAA make you electronically or back in the day on a piece of paper write it down and turn it into them? Why? And we go round and round about this, and the whole answer is for lost communication. In the event of lost communication, if you going from point A to point B and you can't get into point B, now they know where you're going. They're going to look at your alternate. You don't have to go to your alternate if you're in communication with ATC. If I filed for Airport C and we can't get into B and we want to go to D, all you got to do is say, hey, we'd like to divert to Airport D. No problem. They'll let you do it. Same with expected altitude and same with expect further clearance. What is the whole point of that? It's all about lost communication.
Yeah, and boy, I hope this never happens because that's going to be an oh my goodness moment, right? Because no matter how much you've trained, we are always talking to someone. We always have someone in our ear, and when that disappears, it's going to be like soloing, but it's soloing in IMC because there's just going to be a void that we've never experienced before.
Yeah.
I can remember when my instructor got out of the right side, I was like, oh my God, there's so much room in this aircraft all of a sudden. I think it's got to be very similar when you're in IFR conditions and the radios just go silent and you don't have anybody to talk to. That's going to be a very eerie moment.
Yeah, I think we've all heard the phrase "the silence was deafening." I was just watching a show on ESPN about Derek Jeter, and it talked about when he broke his ankle in the playoffs, and I forgot what year it was, and how Yankee Stadium just went silent, and the players were saying it was deafening. The silence was deafening. You don't want that in an airplane.
No, not at all. So hopefully you've enjoyed Lost. We talked about lost procedures for VFR pilots or in VFR conditions. We've talked about lost comms in VFR conditions. We talked about lost comms in IFR conditions. And hopefully you don't experience any of these in your aviation career. But if you do and you listen to this podcast, we hope we've helped just a little bit. As always, fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.